Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the sweeping 800-year historical epic of Portugal. We're going to explore the foundation of this fascinating nation, right up to the modern day. I mean, think about it. How did a country on the very edge of Europe manage to leave such an absolute, indelible mark on the entire globe?
Well, what's really interesting here is how that question perfectly captures Portugal's historical rubber band effect. If you look at the broad arc of Portuguese history, it's not just some slow, steady climb. Actually, it's more like a pendulum. It's constantly swinging back and forth between era-defining global expansion and periods of severe domestic crisis. It's really a story of incredible resilience. To trace this incredible millennium of history, our agenda covers 1. Birth of a nation, 2. The global empire, 3. Crises and early revolutions, 4. Salazar and Estado Novo, and finally, 5. The Carnation Revolution. So, let's get right into it. Section 1. Birth of a nation, from Portugal to the Kingdom of Portugal. Long before it was an independent kingdom, this region was inhabited by Celts, Romans, Suebi, and Visigoths. The name itself actually derives from a combined Roman-Celtic settlement in the north called Portugal. That's where modern-day Porto stands today. Over the centuries, Portugal evolved into Portugal and eventually Portugal. The milestones of this era brilliantly illustrate the long, hard-fought birth of the nation. Back in the late 9th century, the county of Portugal was established. But the real turning point? That hits in 1139 during the Reconquista, that centuries-long effort to recapture the Iberian Peninsula from Moorish control. Following a pretty pivotal battle, Afonso Henriques proclaimed himself King of Portugal. By 1143, neighboring kingdoms officially recognized this independence, and by 1249, the southern region of the Algarve was conquered. And those borders, they've remained virtually unchanged to this day, which is pretty wild to think about. But of course, a small kingdom needs friends, right? Through mutual military support, like when English crusaders actually stopped to help Portugal conquer Lisbon in 1147, the two nations formed a serious bond. So in 1386, they signed the Treaty of Windsor. This established a perpetual alliance between Portugal and England. And amazingly, this remains the oldest active diplomatic alliance in the world today. It essentially became a crucial safety net for Portugal's future ambitions. Moving right along to Section 2, the global empire, expansion, wealth, and the age of discovery. Let's dive into the 15th century, when that historical pendulum swung toward unprecedented global expansion and staggering wealth. This is the era that put Portugal squarely in the center of the world stage. Take the iconic Belém Tower in Lisbon, for example. This architectural marvel was funded by the absolutely immense riches flowing into the capital. By discovering a direct seaborne route to India, Portugal totally bypassed the traditional overland trade monopolies. And the resulting influx of wealth funded a brand new, highly ornate architectural movement known as the Manueling style. It perfectly reflected a nation that was just overflowing with confidence and capital. The achievements of this era are literally staggering. Sparked by visionary leadership from figures like Prince Henry the Navigator, Portugal captured the North African port of Ceuta in 1415. Then, Vasco da Gama reached India by sea in 1498, and Brazil was discovered in 1500. Just like that, this tiny European nation transformed into a massive, multi-continental empire with a highly lucrative monopoly on the global spice trade.
Now we arrive at Section 3, Crises and Early Revolutions. The pendulum swings back. And you know it always swings back. After reaching those dizzying heights of wealth and imperial power, the subsequent centuries brought deep valleys of crisis, tragedy, and some really dramatic revolutionary shifts.
The decline was incredibly steep. In 1578, Portugal suffered a disastrous military defeat in Morocco at Alcácer Quibir, where their young king Sebastian was actually killed. This created a massive succession crisis that led to a 60-year loss of independence, where they were absorbed into the Iberian Union with Spain. Though they fought a restoration war in 1640 to finally win their country back, disaster struck again in 1755. A catastrophic earthquake completely devastated the capital city of Lisbon, so as you can imagine, the empire was severely weakened. So, the crucial takeaway here is that these mounting crises, combined with the loss of their most lucrative colony, Brazil, in 1822, and a whole wave of new Enlightenment ideas sweeping across Europe, they all fueled a massive shift. The 1820 Liberal Revolution established Portugal's first modern parliament and the 1822 Constitution. It officially recognized the principle of popular sovereignty, meaning power comes from the people, and that effectively ended absolute monarchy in Portugal forever.
Which brings us to Section 4, Salazar and Estado Novo, the fall of the monarchy and the rise of authoritarianism. As we enter the 20th century, the political landscape shifts dramatically once again. The monarchy definitively fell in 1910, plunging the country into a pretty chaotic Republican experiment that ultimately paved the way for a strict, authoritarian new order.
The contrast between these two eras is absolutely stark. The First Republic was incredibly turbulent. Over just 16 years, Portugal saw swiftly changing governments, military rebellions, and massive economic chaos. By 1926, the military intervened, and out of this chaos emerged an economist named Antonio de Oliveira Salazar. He was appointed finance minister and eventually became prime minister, replacing the chaos of the Republic with the iron-fisted anti-parliamentary stability of a completely new regime.
This regime was called the Estado Novo, or the New State. To understand this period impartially, we really have to look at what it was built on. It wholly rejected liberal individualism. Instead, heavily influenced by the corporatist movements in Europe at the time, it built an authority-centered society. The state managed the economy, maintained internal security through a secret police force, promoted a really strong Catholic identity, and, crucially, it was absolutely determined to hold on to Portugal's overseas colonial empire at all costs.
And that leads us right into Section 5, the Carnation Revolution, a peaceful coup and the transition to modern democracy. It was that very determination to keep the empire that would actually be the regime's undoing. After nearly a half-century of authoritarian rule and over a decade fighting draining, highly unpopular colonial wars in Africa, the military itself decided the situation was just completely unsustainable.
The transition unfolded super rapidly. Young, disillusioned military officers ended up forming the Armed Forces Movement, and on April 25, 1974, they launched a coup to topple the regime. What followed was a highly volatile period known as the ongoing revolutionary process. After a failed left-wing coup in late 1975, moderate forces prevailed. So by 1976, Portugal had ratified a brand new multi-party democratic constitution. A military attempt to end a war had successfully evolved into a modern democracy.
And we really can't talk about this event without mentioning how it got its name. In this beautiful, deeply humanizing detail from such an epic shift, a restaurant worker named Celeste Cairo began handing out seasonal red carnations to the rebel soldiers in Lisbon. Civilians quickly followed suit, literally placing the flowers right into the muzzles of the insurgents' guns. This broadcasted this strikingly peaceful image to the rest of the world, firmly cementing it in history as the Carnation Revolution.
Now, of course, the revolution brought massive economic changes. While the pre-revolutionary era actually saw a 120% real-term GDP growth between 1961 and 1973, there was a major catch. Portugal still remained severely underdeveloped compared to the rest of Western Europe. They had poor infrastructure and, honestly, some of the worst health and education indicators on the continent. All of this heavily drove the public's intense demand for modernization and just better living standards overall. The revolution also caused a massive demographic shift. Hundreds of thousands. That is the estimated number of retornados. These were Portuguese citizens who rapidly fled the African territories like Angola and Mozambique when Portugal suddenly withdrew and granted them independence. These people, farmers, workers, business owners, they suddenly returned to a European homeland that many barely even knew. This created a massive social challenge for the newly democratic state to absorb. But, the new democracy stabilized. And in 1986, Portugal reached a major milestone by entering the European Economic Community, which we now know as the European Union. This integration was absolutely pivotal. It locked in the democratic reforms of the Third Republic and set Portugal on a continued path of major socioeconomic development, drastically modernizing their health, education, and infrastructure to finally align with their European neighbors. As we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you to ponder this. From a small medieval county fighting for independence, to a global superpower, to a nation surviving earthquakes, dictatorships, and colonial collapse, how have centuries of dramatic peaks and valleys forged the enduring, vibrant, and peaceful democratic identity of Portugal today? It really makes you appreciate the deep, complex roots behind the country we see now. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible historical journey, and keep learning.